Malcolm Reed believed in sustainable communities, in thoughtful urban design that encouraged healthier lifestyles. When he moved into his new home in the leafy but decidedly car-centric neighborhood of Oak Haven Springs, one of his first small projects was to install a sleek, modern, and very sturdy bike rack in a discreet corner of his own front yard. It was for his family's bicycles, and perhaps, he hoped, to subtly encourage a more cycle-friendly mindset in the area. He just secured the final bolt, admiring its clean lines, when the neighborhood's self-appointed guardian of aesthetic monotony descended. Mrs. Diane Pinter, president of the Oak Haven Springs Homeowners Association, a woman whose face seemed permanently pursed in disapproval, marched onto his lawn like a drill sergeant inspecting a barracks. She was flanked by two of her HOA enforcers, one carrying a can of black spray paint with ominous readiness. "Mr. Reed, what is that? That urban blight you've bolted onto your pristine lawn?" Diane Pinter's voice was a high-pitched screech designed to carry. "That metal contraption is an unauthorized structure. It's hideous. It looks like something from a city bus depot. It is in flagrant violation of Oak Haven Springs covenants, conditions, and restrictions, Article 12, regarding non-harmonious yard fixtures." Malcolm, though taken aback by the immediate hostility, replied calmly, "Good morning, Mrs. Pinter. This is a bicycle rack for my family's use. It's a standard design, and I believe it's quite unobtrusive. It certainly promotes a healthy green mode of transportation." "Green transportation?" Diane scoffed, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Or an open invitation for every riffraff cyclist in the county to treat your yard, and by extension, our neighborhood, like some public bike lockup? This isn't a city park, Mr. Reed. This is an exclusive residential enclave. That eyesore is commercial-grade urban trash, and it's got to go." Before Malcolm could even formulate a response, she snapped her fingers at the man with the spray paint. "Gary, beautify it. Make it disappear." With a malicious grin, Gary stepped forward and, with several sweeping hisses of the spray can, completely coated Malcolm's new silver bike rack in a thick, dripping layer of ugly black paint. The acrid smell filled the air. "No, stop that!" Malcolm yelled, lunging forward, but Diane and her other enforcer physically blocked his path. He watched, his heart pounding with a mixture of disbelief and cold fury, as his brand-new, perfectly good bike rack was transformed into a defaced piece of junk. "That's what we think of your urban trash and your green initiatives here in Oak Haven Springs, Mr. Reed," Diane declared triumphantly, her voice dripping with smug satisfaction. She then raised a megaphone seemingly materialized for such occasions. "Attention, Oak Haven Springs residents." Her amplified voice, sharp and accusatory, echoed through the quiet, tree-lined streets. "Your vigilant HOA has taken immediate action against an unauthorized and unsightly metal installation on Poplar Drive. The resident, Mr. Malcolm Reed, a newcomer with a clear disregard for our community's aesthetic standards, has attempted to turn his yard into a public eyesore. He is a messy, inconsiderate slob, and we will not tolerate such behavior." Slob, for installing a bike rack. Neighbors drawn by Diane's characteristic harangue began to emerge from their homes. A few looked uncomfortable, but many, already conditioned by Diane's iron-fisted rule and her tendency to label anything unfamiliar as undesirable, quickly took her side. "His bike rack is pretty awful, isn't it, dear?" one woman stage whispered to her companion, loud enough for Malcolm to hear. "Looks like something you'd find in a back alley." "Diane's absolutely right to get rid of it," another man shouted from his porch, clearly one of Diane's loyalists. "We don't need that kind of industrial junk making our neighborhood look bad. Spray paint the whole thing black, Diane. Better yet, rip it out." A couple of teenagers, snickering, then picked up clods of dirt and began pelting the newly painted, dripping bike rack. "This is vandalism, pure and simple," Malcolm stated, his voice tight with controlled anger. "You have trespassed on my property, destroyed my private property, and you are publicly slandering me with baseless accusations." "Baseless?" Diane sneered, clearly reveling in the confrontation. Her other associate, a woman named Mildred with a phone camera, was gleefully filming the entire scene, focusing on Malcolm's distressed face in the defaced bike rack. We have photographic and video evidence of your installation, Mr. Reed, and your defiant, messy attitude. It will all be posted on the HOA's Community Watch website by this afternoon, as a warning to others who might think of cluttering our beautiful neighborhood with their urban refuse. She then produced a pre-printed HOA citation. And speaking of violations, Mr. Reed, this is your official notice. For erecting an unauthorized structure, for violating multiple aesthetic covenants, and for the cost incurred by this HOA in improving your unsightly fixture, you are hereby fined $250, payable within 72 hours. She thrust the citation at him. And be warned, if that defaced piece of metal isn't completely removed by then, the fines will double daily, and we will initiate legal proceedings to have it forcibly removed at your expense and to explore all options for your removal from this community as a persistent nuisance. $250, eviction for a bicycle rack. Malcolm, a man whose entire professional life was dedicated to designing and implementing thoughtful, sustainable, and aesthetically pleasing urban environments for entire cities, was being subjected to this petty, ignorant, and clearly racially tinged tyranny over a simple, functional piece of metal. The video, titled Oak Haven Springs, Ho Tackles Residents' Ugly Bike Junk, Neighborhood Beautified. Zrenia was, as promised, online within the hour. It was a masterpiece of manipulative editing, portraying Malcolm as an unreasonable and defiant slob, and Diane Pinter as the heroic guardian of neighborhood beauty and order. The comment section was a predictable torrent of racist assumptions, classist snobbery, and gleeful support for Diane's strong leadership. Good for Diane. We don't need his kind of urban art here. He probably was planning to run a bike gang from his yard. Malcolm Reed, Director of City Urban Planning and a nationally recognized expert in sustainable transportation infrastructure, stood in his own yard, his new bike rack defaced and dripping with black paint, his character assassinated, his home threatened, all because a petty tyrant with a megaphone and a can of spray paint disliked a piece of metal. The injustice was a bitter, acrid taste in his mouth. But as he looked at Diane Pinter's smug, triumphant face, a different kind of planning began to take shape in his mind, not for a city, but for a meticulously executed, legally sound, and very public dismantling of her ignorant little empire. She thought she had won a battle over a bike rack. She had no idea she had just declared war on the very fabric of thoughtful community planning and on the man who wrote the rulebook for it. The defacement of his new bike rack and the absurd $250 fine were, for Malcolm Reed, not just an attack on his property, but an assault on the very principles of thoughtful community planning and sustainable living he dedicated his career to. While Diane Pinter was busy on the Oak Haven Springs HOA's Facebook page, garnering likes from her echo chamber for her brave stand against neighborhood blight, Malcolm was on a series of discreet video calls, not to a private litigator initially, but to the city attorney's office, in a carefully unofficial capacity, outlining a hypothetical scenario of HOA overreach regarding city-encouraged green transport initiatives, and to his own senior staff at the city planning department, tasking them with a comprehensive review of Oak Haven Springs HOA covenants versus existing city ordinances, zoning laws, and public right-of-way statutes. It appears, Mr. Mayor, Malcolm later reported in a private briefing, as the Director of Urban Planning, he reported directly to the mayor on key initiatives. We have a particularly egregious example of an HOA in the Oak Haven Springs district that is actively obstructing city-endorsed green transportation goals and potentially violating several municipal codes with its arbitrary aesthetic enforcement, not to mention engaging in what appears to be targeted harassment of a new resident based on flimsy pretexts. This warrants a closer look, perhaps even a full departmental audit of their compliance with city master plans. Diane Pinter, blissfully unaware of the municipal-level scrutiny her actions were beginning to attract, saw Malcolm's lack of immediate, visible capitulation. He did not remove the now spray-painted bike rack, nor did he pay her bogus fine as further defiance. She launched Operation Aesthetic Harmony, a neighborhood-wide crusade to identify and eradicate all non-conforming visual elements that detract from the pristine character of Oak Haven Springs. This, of course, was primarily aimed at Malcolm. Her HOA beautification task force, consisting of herself, the spray-painting goon Gary, and the ever-vigilant Mildred, now armed with a tape measure and a copy of the HOA's ludicrously detailed and often contradictory aesthetic guidelines, began to prowl the neighborhood. They issued a flurry of new violation notices to Malcolm. His recycling bins were improperly angled at the curb. The native drought-resistant plants in his front flower bed were not on the HOA pre-approved foliage list, which favored water-guzzling, non-native ornamentals. Even the welcome mat on his front porch was cited for being of a non-regulation color and excessive textual content. It said, "Welcome, friends." Each new citation came with an additional fine and a threat of further legal action. The online slander campaign also intensified. Diane, using anonymous profiles, started a Save Oak Haven Springs from Urban Decay blog, where she posted concerned citizen reports about Malcolm's attempts to turn his property into a bicycle chop shop because he was seen trying to clean the black paint off his expensive bike rack, or his blatant disregard for neighborhood harmony by installing industrial-looking metal fixtures. She insinuated he was probably an outside agitator sent by developers to deliberately lower property values so they could buy up the neighborhood cheap and build high-rises. The comments section became a hotbed of NIMBY paranoia and thinly veiled racism. How could one woman's obsession with aesthetic control and her fear of anything urban create such a toxic, misinformed environment? Malcolm, meanwhile, endured this siege with the methodical patience of a seasoned urban planner used to dealing with irrational opposition to progressive projects. His home, intended as a quiet retreat, now felt like a case study in dysfunctional community governance. But he was not idle. He meticulously documented every new violation notice, every slanderous online post, every act of petty harassment, like his newspaper being accidentally thrown into his sprinklers. He also began, in his off hours, to draft a detailed proposal for a citywide green HOA partnership program, incentivizing homeowners associations to adopt sustainable practices and pro-cyclist infrastructure, complete with model bylaws that would preempt the kind of arbitrary nonsense Diane was peddling. The hints of his true professional identity, his deep expertise in the very regulations Diane claimed to be upholding, continued to be hilariously, tragically misinterpreted. One Saturday morning, Malcolm was in his driveway, not with a bicycle, but with a surveyor's wheel and a set of official-looking city zoning maps, carefully measuring the public right-of-way and the setback from his property line to the curb, all in preparation for his legal response to the HOA. Mildred, coincidentally walking her yappy poodle, saw him. "Diane, Diane," she reported, her voice trembling with excitement. "He's out there with measuring tapes and maps. He's planning to build something else, something bigger, probably a giant radio tower to spy on us all, or maybe he's going to claim half the street as his own. He's a rogue surveyor, a land grabber." Diane, whose understanding of property lines was based on where her rose bushes ended, readily agreed. "A land grab? I knew he was a shyster. He's trying to steal our precious Oak Haven Springs, one illegal bike rack at a time." Another time, Malcolm was on a video conference call in his home office, the window slightly ajar. He was a keynote speaker, remotely, at a national urban planning summit, discussing innovative solutions for integrating sustainable transportation into suburban master plans. His voice, though low, was clear and authoritative as he spoke of complete streets initiatives, traffic calming measures, bicycle superhighways, and the socio-economic benefits of walkable communities. Gary, the spray painter, who was under duress from Diane, inspecting Malcolm's rain gutters for unapproved leaf accumulation, overheard snippets. Bicycle superhighways, traffic calming, master plans. He rushed to Diane. "He's planning to turn our streets into freeways for bicycles. He wants to block all the cars. He's got a master plan to destroy Oak Haven Springs with his crazy urban schemes." Diane was now utterly convinced that Malcolm Reed was not just a messy slob with a tacky bike rack, but a dangerous radical, a rogue city operative, perhaps a disgruntled low-level employee in her mind, hell-bent on imposing a dystopian urban nightmare on her idyllic suburb. She felt a surge of heroic self-importance. She was the thin beige line protecting Oak Haven Springs from this madness. The HOA's local lawyer, Skip Peterson, who was beginning to look like he hadn't slept in weeks and was developing a nervous twitch whenever Diane Pinter's name was mentioned, was bullied by Diane into sending Malcolm a final demand before legal action and property lien. It stated that if all accumulated fines, now totaling over $1,500 with new, imaginative charges like unauthorized geological surveying on private property and conspiracy to promote excessive bicycle traffic, were not paid within 48 hours, and if the offending metal bicycle obstruction was not completely removed, the HOA would file an immediate lawsuit seeking his eviction, a permanent injunction against him ever owning a bicycle again, and full restitution for the emotional distress and aesthetic damage he had caused the community. This was it, the absolute peak of their bureaucratic, prejudiced lunacy. They were threatening to sue him for owning a bike rack based on rules that likely violated city ordinances he himself had helped write. Malcolm received this latest missive of madness with a sigh that was less about weariness and more about a dawning, steely anticipation. The time for quiet documentation and behind-the-scenes planning was drawing to a close. Diane Pinter wanted a showdown over her misinterpretations of community planning and property rights. As the city's director of urban planning, Malcolm Reed was uniquely, almost poetically, qualified to give her one. That evening, Diane Pinter, feeling magnanimous in her impending triumph, decided to personally deliver a courtesy copy of the final demand to Malcolm, perhaps hoping to witness his final, groveling capitulation. She brought Mildred with her, smartphone at the ready to capture Mr. Reed's inevitable meltdown. She rang his doorbell, a smug smirk already playing on her lips. Malcolm opened the door. He was not distressed. He was not angry. He looked calm, almost welcoming. "Mrs. Pinter, Mildred," he said, his voice even. "What an unexpected pleasure. Won't you come in for a moment? I was just reviewing some rather interesting city plans. Perhaps you could offer your unique perspective." Diane, surprised by his composure but smelling a trap, or perhaps an admission of guilt, hesitated. "We're not here for a social call, Reed. We're here to deliver this." She thrust the demand letter at him. Malcolm took it, glanced at it briefly, then met her gaze. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "Actually, Mrs. Pinter," he said, stepping aside and gesturing into his well-appointed living room, where several official-looking blueprints were spread across a large table. "I think you'll find what I have to show you far more pertinent to your community enforcement actions. Please, after you." Diane Pinter, flanked by a visibly nervous Mildred, smartphone still at the ready, though her glee had vanished, stood in Malcolm Reed's surprisingly spacious and well-organized living room. On a large drafting table, unrolled with an almost ceremonial flourish by Malcolm, was not some amateurish sketch, but a highly detailed, official-looking blueprint of the entire Oak Haven Springs subdivision, complete with zoning overlays, public easements, and proposed green infrastructure corridors. "As I was saying, Mrs. Pinter," Malcolm began, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable weight of authority, "your interpretation of community standards and your HOA's enforcement actions appear to be somewhat at odds with established municipal planning directives and, indeed, city law." Diane, though clearly unsettled by Malcolm's sudden composure in the official-looking documents, tried to rally. "Don't try to intimidate me with your fancy maps, Reed," she blustered, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. "This is about a tacky, illegal bike rack that you installed without HOA approval. This is about your fine of $250, which is now overdue. And this is about your eviction if you don't comply." Malcolm simply smiled, a thin, almost pitying smile. "Mrs. Pinter, my tacky bike rack, as you so charmingly put it, is actually a prototype model fully compliant with and indeed encouraged by the city's recently adopted Green Wheels initiative, a comprehensive plan to promote sustainable transportation and install secure bicycle parking throughout our municipality. A plan, I might add, that my department drafted and which City Council unanimously approved last March. He then reached into his breast pocket and produced a slim leather wallet. From it, he extracted not cash, but an official city identification card. He placed it on the blueprint before her. Malcolm Reed, Director, Department of Urban Planning and Development, city of their city name. The air in the room seemed to crackle. Mildred let out a small, strangled gasp and nearly dropped her phone. Diane Pinter stared at the ID card, then at Malcolm, then back at the ID card, her face going through a rapid, alarming series of color changes, from indignant red to a sickly, mottled white. Director of Urban Planning, she whispered, her voice barely audible. You make the city rules? I oversee their development and ensure their implementation? Yes, Malcolm confirmed, his voice still calm, which brings me to several rather serious concerns. As he spoke, the doorbell rang. Malcolm, with a polite nod to his stunned HOA president, answered it. Standing on his porch were three individuals, a stern-faced woman in a business suit who introduced herself as Ms. Eleanor Vance, Deputy City Attorney, a man in a city code enforcement uniform, carrying a thick binder, and a younger woman from the City Planning Department's Community Outreach Division, holding a digital recorder. Ah, Ms. Vance, Officer Miller, Ms. Chen, please come in, Malcolm said, gesturing them into the living room, where Diane and Mildred now looked like cornered animals. Mrs. Pinter, Ms. Mildred, this is my city planning team, who I invited to discuss some pressing Oak Haven Springs matters. Ms. Vance, the deputy city attorney, did not waste time. Mrs. Diane Pinter, she began, her voice sharp and professional, we are here today on behalf of the city of their city name. The Department of Urban Planning and Development, under Director Reed's purview, has conducted a preliminary review of the Oak Haven Springs Homeowners Association's bylaws, recent enforcement actions, and multiple informal complaints received from other residents prior to Director Reed even taking up residence here. She continued, her gaze unwavering. It appears this HOA, under your leadership, Mrs. Pinter, has engaged in a pattern of selective and discriminatory enforcement, has instituted bylaws that directly contravene established city ordinances regarding public access, sustainable landscaping, and non-discriminatory signage, and has, in the specific case of Director Reed, committed acts of vandalism against private property, the defacement of his bicycle rack, and engaged in a campaign of public slander and harassment. Officer Miller, the code enforcement officer, then stepped forward, opening his binder. Furthermore, Mrs. Pinter, he stated, your HOA's unapproved installation of that rather undersized flagpole on the public verge this morning, apparently to antagonize Director Reed, is a direct violation of City Municipal Code Section 77B regarding unpermitted structures in public rights-of-way. And your unauthorized use of an amplified sound device for non-emergency announcements within a residential zone is a violation of Noise Ordinance 14.3 inches. Diane Pinter looked like she was about to hyperventilate. But the bike rack, it was ugly. It was urban trash. I was protecting property values. Our bylaws. Your bylaws, Mrs. Pinter, Miss Vance interjected coolly, cannot supersede city ordinances or state and federal law, and your personal aesthetic preferences do not grant you the authority to vandalize property or defame residents. The city's Green Wheels initiative actively encourages the installation of secure bicycle parking. Director Reed's bike rack was, in fact, a model example. She then placed a thick document on the table in front of Diane. This is an official order to comply from the city. The Oak Haven Springs HOA is hereby directed to 1. Immediately and publicly rescind all fines and threats levied against Director Malcolm Reed. 2. Issue a formal, written public apology to Director Reed for the vandalism, harassment, and defamation, to be posted prominently on all HOA communication platforms and the community notice board for a period of no less than 30 days. 3. undertake a complete and comprehensive review and revision of all HOA bylaws to ensure full compliance with all applicable city ordinances and state laws, under the direct supervision and subject to the final approval of the City Planning Department. And four, Mrs. Vance added, her voice like ice, you, Mrs. Pinter, are to immediately cease and desist from any further acts of harassment, slander, or abuse of your HOA authority against any resident. Failure to comply fully with all terms of this order within 7 business days will result in the city initiating legal proceedings to dissolve this homeowners association and place its governance under temporary municipal administration. You may also face personal civil and potentially criminal charges for abuse of authority, malicious mischief, and other violations. Diane stared at the document, her hand trembling so violently she couldn't pick it up. Mildred was openly weeping. The crowd of neighbors who had gathered outside Malcolm's house, drawn by the arrival of the official city vehicles and the tense atmosphere, were now peering through the windows, their faces a mixture of shock, dawning comprehension, and for some who had also suffered under Diane's rule, barely concealed delight. The director of city planning, one whispered, aghast. She spray-painted the city planning director's bike rack and called him a slob. Oh, Diane Pinter, you didn't just break an HOA rule. You broke the entire city code. You are toast. Malcolm Reed then spoke, his voice calm but carrying the weight of his office. Mrs. Pinter, he said, a community is not built on arbitrary rules and the personal whims of its leadership. It is built on respect, on collaboration, on adherence to the broader laws and sound planning principles that ensure fairness and quality of life for all residents. Oak Haven Springs has the potential to be a model community if it chooses to embrace sensible, inclusive, and sustainable planning. This, he gestured to the order to comply, is your opportunity to begin that process. The public humiliation of Diane Pinter was swift and total. At an emergency HOA meeting convened that evening, attended by a very stern Ms. Vance from the city attorney's office, a stammering, tearful Diane read aloud the HOA's groveling public apology to Director Reed. She was then overwhelmingly and very publicly voted out as HOA president and stripped of all her committee positions, her reign of petty tyranny over. The HOA, under new, chastened leadership and strict city oversight, began the painful but necessary process of reforming its bylaws and its culture. Malcolm Reed, true to his professional calling, didn't seek personal vengeance beyond the public apology and the cessation of harassment. Instead, he worked with the new HOA board and the city to implement his Green Wheels initiative throughout Oak Haven Springs, with the city subsidizing the installation of attractive, secure bike racks in common areas and offering incentives for residents to install their own. Every street soon had them, except, by a curious coincidence of optimal placement review, the public verge directly in front of Diane Pinter's house remained conspicuously bare. The final, uniquely fitting scene, several weeks later. It's a bright Saturday morning, and Oak Haven Springs is hosting a Community Cycle and Green Living Day, an idea championed by Director Reed and enthusiastically adopted by the new HOA. Families are cycling, children are learning about composting from a city parks department booth, and new sleek bike racks are everywhere, filled with bicycles. Diane Pinter is also there, but not as a participant. As part of a community restitution agreement she'd been forced to accept to avoid further personal legal entanglements from residents she'd previously harassed, she is miserably attempting to inflate the tires of a very old, very rickety, public-use rental bicycle with a faulty hand pump. The bike is clearly too small for her, and she's struggling, sweating, and looking utterly defeated as nimble children on their new bikes zip past her with pitying or slightly mocking glances. One well-meaning but oblivious child even calls out, "Need some help with your wobbly bike, lady?" Diane flinches, her face burning with shame. Malcolm Reed, in casual attire, is chatting happily with a group of residents, perhaps demonstrating how to properly lock a bike to one of the new racks. He glances briefly at Diane's struggles, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, then turns back to his community. His voiceover calm and thoughtful. Good urban planning isn't just about infrastructure. It's about fostering community, promoting healthy choices, and ensuring that the rules we live by are fair, equitable, and serve the future, not just the prejudices of the present. You don't destroy plans for a better, greener tomorrow. You work together to build them. One cycle path, one shared green space, one respected neighbor at a time. The camera focuses on one of the new gleaming bike racks, where a child is happily parking their brightly colored bicycle. A small, tasteful plaque on the rack reads, Oak Haven Springs Greenways, Transportation Justice. The imagined audience would erupt in cheers. The city planner just blueprinted her downfall. Diane got a permit for permanent humiliation. That's what you call a master plan for justice with bike lanes.